Hello and welcome back. Today we are talking about my track called Sleep. But before we go any further, I'd love to invite you to join my newsletter, which is very occasional, but just kind of a nice way to stay in touch outside of social media. So if you feel so inclined, the link to join is in the caption below, and I would love to have you. Let's get started. Welcome to the Ableton session of Sleep. Sleep is a pretty simplistic and effortless track with minimal layers, but within each of the layers, there's a lot happening. So I'd love to go through each with you and also show you a little bit about how the writing process for a song like this, and also many songs on the record, take place. So to start off, let's just look at the bottom, which is the easiest layer here. This is our cricket layer, which I'll turn up so you can hear. Okay. So as you can hear in the layer, there's a lot happening in this track. It's kind of sonically active and dense. But when you tuck it down, what you're left with, well, you just snap back there. There we go. What you're left with is just this higher end kind of rustling of the grass, the crickets, and just the breeze, really, the air moving through the air. And that's the type of element that I love to add into a track like this, because you don't really register it, but it's also subconsciously registered, which is really great. And you'll see as we go, I kind of automate this up and down throughout the piece just to bring it in and out. So it's not just this stagnant kind of not moving layer. So there's a little bit of air and movement to the air and movement. And the reason that I like putting these types of tracks in is because it just gives that little bit of depth to the instrumentation. So it's this kind of natural, humanistic kind of layer that your brain already subconsciously knows what it is, and it just kind of fades into the background, and it does a lot by barely being there. So that's the field recording. Let's take a look at these modular layers. So the modular layers don't have a lot happening, but within each of them, there's a lot happening. And I'll show you kind of what I mean. So we'll head on over to the rack. Welcome to the rack. I wanted to show you that this is kind of the way that I start writing. Because I'm not a songwriter that just wakes up with something in his head, as I've mentioned before, this is my bandmate. This is my writing partner. And when I sit down in front of it, I have all of these tools to help me kind of start thinking about where I want this track to go. And what I'll do typically is sit with just the rack, and I'll just let the computer record, and I will be focused solely on the rack. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start our tempo. Our master brain, our master clock is coming from Pamela's new workout, and she's sending clock to all of the devices that require it. So Mimeophone is getting it, the DivKit aux are getting it, the 4MS SWN is getting it, but most importantly, Bloom is getting it. Now, Bloom is the biggest tool that I use. Bloom is a sequencer, but it's different than other sequencers in that you can set up different branches and mutations and paths and roots. It's kind of like this organismic. Let's just have you read about it on YouTube if you want. Qubit Bloom, check it out. It's sending its node information to this 4MS dual envelope VCA, which is then being sent to the make noise STOs. So the trigger is coming from Bloom into the STO. STO is feeding out to the 4MS envelope VCA, which is creating the plucks. And then from there, typically, I'm sending to Morphogene, Mimeophone, QPOS, Starlab, and then into my computer. And the way that I get in and out of my computer is through ADAT. And ADAT is going through the Expert Sleepers ES8. Now, I have 4 channels going into my computer, which essentially are 2 sets of stereo. And I have that arranged in 2 different sends, basically. So I have 2 different paths. I have one path being mostly The note information, the melody, any sort of melodic rhythmic stuff is going into channel 1 and 2. And then anything that's more patty and ethereal is going into channel 3 and 4. So on sleep, the ensemble oscillator from 4MS is going into 3 and 4, and that's separated out from Bloom feeding the STOs. And that's so that I can treat them differently and do different stuff. So anyways, we have Bloom going. Let's take a listen to that right now. And it's not doing all that much. But when you start bringing in the make noise mimeophone delay unit, it starts to become more interesting pretty quickly. So this is typically how I would get started. We've got something going on now. Feel it out. Maybe play with the filter a little bit. The filter's also getting some sort of subtle variations on the radiate knobs here, if you're familiar with QPOS at all. But they will be affected differently on the left and the right side, which gives this really cool feeling. And I have it set up in the low pass mode, but you do band pass, high pass, and smile pass, I believe it is. So we're getting a little interesting here. And from here, I would typically start bringing in Strymon Starlab, because why not? It's so beautiful. Get a little tucked under here. I have it set up in octave shimmer mode, but you can pretty easily bring that down with just one hand. Maybe we don't want to filter out as much anymore, or maybe we do. So you can see we got something really dense already happening, very sonically interesting. And maybe we'll want to record a little into the morphogene here of the line that's coming in. Maybe we'll stop Bloom from going by pulling the clock out. And now we are getting harmonics. Then we can bring down what's going into beads. And like this right here might be the starting point. After all of those minutes leading up to this might be the place that I start editing from. Because this feels really good. But without having gone through that whole process, we would have never ended up here to start and begin. So it's almost a necessary part of the process for me to experiment and get lost in this and not try to make anything happen. I'm not writing yet. I'm experimenting, I'm playing, and then I start to write. It's just what works for me, but this is how it works. So there you go. The beginning parts of sleep are hidden within a few minute performance of playing in the rack, and you would have never gotten there if you didn't play and have fun. So the takeaway from that is when you sit down to write, don't sit down to write, sit down to play. That's my advice, at least for me. Always be recording so that you can go back and pick it out from there. And let's just end with a little Okay, let's go back to the Ableton session. See you there. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully that was helpful and fun, and you learned a little something and picked up a tip or two here or there. So for sleep, I had gone through and I loved a lot of the way that this started. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the middle that kind of just felt superfluous or maybe just had already been said. So I edited it down, and we have right here our 2 modular layers. So let's listen to how it starts. So the way it starts is through this modulating 4MS ensemble oscillator. And what's happening is the root note of the chord is being modulated and stepping through a preset scale. And it's getting a LFO sent to it from the DivKid Occ module, or OCHD. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Which is kind of this asynchronous LFO. And I really like it because it just breathes and it moves like a human being. And then you can hear, let's take a listen to this, shall we? That ticking of time, rhythmic, clock-like sound is Bloom from Qubit, triggering 2 STOs into Make Noise Mimeophone, being passed into Make Noise QPOS, which is a stereo filter, into Strymon Starlab. And the reason that I really enjoyed what was happening here and what really made me start to think of sleep is it just felt like it was this raindroppy, tick-tocky, drifting off to sleep type of feeling, stacking it on top of the ensemble oscillator. And you've got something kind of nice happening there, right? Let's take a look at the processing. We'll just work with this first. So we're using our trusty FabFilter Pro Q3 to dynamically notch out a frequency. And I'm also sculpting away a little bit of the low end here at about 56 Hertz. And we have this dynamic EQ engaged at about 276. That was probably because there's a resonant frequency happening in the performance in the rack that I wanted to just control or dampen a little bit. And when you use a dynamic EQ like this, you can essentially only sculpt away the frequency when it's there, leaving everything else untouched in that frequency range. So you can see we're pulling down quite a bit, or we could just do a little subtle notching of it. And I like doing that in the low mid frequency because it cleans up a lot of your mud, which in turn gives you more headroom to work with and overall loudness in your track. So even if you're not perceiving the low end in your ears with your brain, it's still affecting the overall image. The overall picture of your sonic space is it's using a lot of real estate down there, even though you can't realize it. So when you clean up the bottom end, such as this, you start to sculpt away those building up frequencies. You can actually push a lot more that way. So instead of adding more to it, you're pulling away so that you can get more perceived loudness. And then on our, well, actually, before we keep going, that was the cleanup EQ. I now have the sculpting and the characteristic EQ. And we're using the SSL 4000E channel strip from UAD. And in it, we're just kind of lightly adjusting certain things. I'm pulling the volume down overall of the track. I'm adjusting a little bit of the high frequency, pulling some of that out while pushing the high mids, and then lightly pushing up the low frequency and sculpting out, again, 20 Hertz. Not much happening on it. That's the overall takeaway from this track is simple, simple, simple. But the one thing that we do have that automates in and out, and one of the greatest things about Ableton that I love so much, is that everything is automation enabled if you want it to be. So in Pro Tools, you kind of have to go in and you have to set your automation mode to say, I want this to be in write mode, I want this to be in touch mode, touch latch mode. yada, yada, yada. When you're in record mode in Ableton, everything is recordable, and you can go through and you can make adjustments and play with things on the fly. And that's something that I love so much about Ableton, is it's this sandbox. It just really encourages experimentation and fun, and also you just don't overthink things. So I wouldn't maybe normally think to grab for an auto filter, but with Ableton being so fun and handy like this, I go for it. And you can see that we start to sculpt away the high end there, which is a low pass filter. And it's just having the effect of kind of putting your fingers in your ears and the transition from wakefulness to sleep. And the reason why I use a auto filter like that is because it just pulls the image and the placement of it in the stereo field in and out. And it sinks more further into the background, which allows a lot of the other layers to speak. Around the same time on the other track, we have another auto filter that's doing the same thing. It has a bit more of a drastic effect, so we can take a look at the automation there. So you'll see we start out and dip pretty hard, almost all the way down to 200 hertz. And it has this sort of peaceful, lulling you to sleep vibe where it almost disappears completely. But then it comes back around and it's almost like you're traversing through the different stages of sleep. Pairing that with this guy, it just lets the two layers play off of each other, almost like you're going in and out of REM sleep, NREM sleep, wakefulness, and deep sleep. So as this track here becomes more distant, more washed out in verb from the Strymon Starlab, it's becoming wider, farther away, a little ethereal. The ensemble oscillator is pulsing forward and backwards. And then we push all the way up. For the finale. Those are just the two layers. And I think that that's why I kept the rest of the instrumentation fairly simple, because these two modular layers, these two performances that were captured simultaneously at the same time, are in essence complete performances. They're a complete thought. However, I felt like it needed a little something for the brain to grab onto, and that's where the piano came in. So let's take a look at the piano. So it's frozen right now to save on some processing, but this is a VST from Spitfire Audio called Olafur Arnold's Toolkit. It's this composer toolkit that they have. It has this beautiful felted piano in it that has this modulated reverb. It's gorgeous, tons of things in it for you. Highly recommend you checking it out. And while I wish, against all wishes, that I had an upright piano to turn around and just play one day, I go for this as the sleepy, dreamy piano that is featured in this track because it just feels so right. It feels so delicate and emotional. I'm very lightly laying into the keys here. Playing octaves in the bass hand. And this is why I like writing with the modular first. So it allows me the time to kind of hear these other lines on top of it, because I'm not the type of person that wakes up, I'm not the type of songwriter that wakes up with a song in his head. I need to hear something and have input for me to give the feedback to that. So when I work with the modular rig is like a writing partner. It's my John to my Paul, or my Paul to my John. And when I get to work with a machine like that takes simple input and synthesizes it in this way that makes kind of a sonic palette for my brain to start working with, it's almost like working with a bandmate. And that is one of the things working as a solo artist that I do miss about being in a band is the collaborative mindset of working together, hearing people's ideas. And so what I do accomplish as working as a solo artist is by working with a machine that I do feel is very intimately connected to my writing process. So while this is kind of chugging along, happening, it lets my brain start humming, start thinking, okay, what would this chord progression look like? Here's the bed, here's the bass. What do we do? And as soon as I started playing these notes, everything started to come into picture for me. I wanted this to be such a lullaby. I wanted the track to mirror what sleep should be. I wanted this piece to be simple and effortless, light and dreamy, just the way sleep should be. And while sleep hasn't come as naturally to me over the last bit of time, I know that it will come around again. And this is my message to myself and maybe others that are struggling to find peaceful sleep, that all you have to do is just let go. And instead of fully arranging this piece and overcomplicating it, I just put the pieces in that felt that should be there and didn't try to do anything else. I think as songwriters, sometimes we try to show you everything we got while we have your attention. But I think that there is a quiet confidence in only showing you what you need to hear. And I think for this track, I was feeling like this was nearly done. This piano with the bass notes playing against this modular performance really only called for one more thing, and that was for the prophet. So what we're listening to right there is the Prophet 6. And while I have swapped it out for the powerful, mighty Juno 60 from Rosensound, I have this captured in here, and I also have a way to replicate it if you don't have a Prophet yourself. So really quickly, an amazing plugin from UE, Repro 5. It comes in a pack, Repro 1, Repro 5. So here's Repro 1 over here, and here's Repro 5. So Repro 5 is their take on the Prophet. And if you listen, nearly identical, which is really amazing, and which is why I use this so often, especially when I don't turn on one of the synths sitting behind me. This is an amazing tool, fairly affordable. I think you can demo it. But let's take a look at the real Prophet for a second and take off this reverb, shall we? So here's what it sounds like dry. Almost like an electric piano, almost like a childlike feeling, which again goes to this lullaby that I was trying to accomplish. Like a tine, like a tine piano, Rhodes, a whirly, any type of thing like that. And I don't always record with effects on, but in this case, I actually did. And I used this amazing reverb from Baby Audio called Spaced Out. There's a setting on there that is pretty much the only setting that I use. They could have a million other presets on it, and I just don't use them. This is the only one that I use. It's called Harold's Piano, which is, I think, in homage to Harold Budd, one of the originators of ambient music alongside Brian Eno. And so when you pop that on, this thing just breathes and really comes to life. has all of these harmonics, which informed the playing, which is why I recorded with a reverb on. It informed the line, really. It made it so that there weren't too many notes crammed in there because I wanted each note to speak clearly. And playing off of the super dry piano, well, with a touch of reverb. Alrighty, so there you are. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4 plus sound effects, 5 elements that make up this track. Wanted it to be very simple, very effortless, very light, very dreamlike, hence the name Sleep. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Let's take a listen through to the whole performance.